Okay, we ready? Here we go. Ian, is there a Mikrot Gedolo Shmot? Hand it to me, please. Okay. Shir begins. I'm going to need a Gemara Sota. Shir begins with a Balaturim. This is a Balaturim, which many people think is a Gemara or a Medrash or something because it's quite well known. Raise your hand if you've heard of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu's name does not appear in Parshat Tetzaveh. Okay, most people here have heard of that idea. That Moshe Rabbeinu's name doesn't appear in Tetzaveh. Anyone here ever hear of a reason why his name doesn't appear in Tetzaveh? Yes.
Because of his prayer for not destroying the
Good. That is a Balaturim. It's not a Chazal. It's not a Medrash. It's a Balaturim. There is a Zohar that seems to imply it, but that's basically what it is. Here we go. Here's the Balaturim. Lo hizkir Moshe b'zeh seder. Moshe is not mentioned in this parsha. Now, is that unique, by the way? Is it unique for it to have Moshe Rabbeinu's name not appear in a parsha?
No.
What? Okay, obviously in all of Sefer Bereshis his name does not appear. His name appears in every single parsha except Tetzaveh in all of Shmot, Vayikra, and Bamidbar. In Dvarim, there's actually a number of parshas where his name doesn't appear, but that's because he's talking. The whole Sefer Dvarim are speeches Moshe Rabbeinu gave, except for a few psukim here and there. So naturally, in some of those speeches, which span several parshas, he's just talking. There's no reason for his name to appear. Yes.
Why is this even a question if the parshas were separated by man?
It's not really a question. But Moshe Rabbeinu's name does not appear in Parshas Tetzaveh. It's not really a question. It's the Balaturim trying to teach us some deeper lesson by presenting a question and an answer. Here we go. Lo iskir Moshe b'zeh seder, ma she'ein kein b'chol chumash, which is not true in the rest of the Chumash, sort of. Okay? Shemishah shenolad Moshe ein seder shelo yuzkar ba, because from the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was born, there's no seder, there's no parsha in which Moshe Rabbeinu was not mentioned. Sort of. B'hatam, and the reason is mishum shenemar. Here's what Daniel Lazar just mentioned. Mishum shenemar mecheni na misifracha asher katavta. Wipe me out from the book that you have written, and it cites here a Zohar in Parshas Pinchas, which is a little bit different than this, but it's close enough. The kilalat chacham, and the curse of a chacham, afilu al tanai ba, kain b'zeh. The curse of a chacham, even if it's made al tanai, even if it's made on a condition, even if the condition isn't fulfilled, it still somehow gets fulfilled. In other words, God does the will of tzaddikim, even if they say a curse, even if it doesn't get fulfilled, even if the condition doesn't get fulfilled, so it won't be fulfilled in whole, but in part it will still be fulfilled. There's some impression that it makes. And what happened was, after the golden calf, after the sin of the golden calf, God says He's going to wipe out the Jewish people. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, forgive them, and if not, join us, come back to Am Yisrael, whatever the whole dialogue there with Moshe Rabbeinu. And he says, if not, v'im ayin, if you don't forgive Am Yisrael and you don't come back and rejoin us, Hashem, wipe me out of the book that you have written. So, as a result of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu said that, his name was omitted from Parshas Tetzaveh. Okay, what's the obvious question? Why Tetzaveh? Good. Tetzaveh is before the Chet HaEgel. The natural omission of his name should be either the Parsha of the Chet HaEgel. That would be difficult because it's a narrative Parsha that involves Moshe Rabbeinu a lot. Or maybe the Parsha right after the Chet HaEgel. How about that? Maybe Vayakel. Leave his name out of there. Okay? So the question is obviously why Tetzaveh, and what's this whole idea? Why did he say that at the Chet HaEgel? Why did he say that? Wipe my name out of the book. Wipe me out of the book that you've written. That's exactly what Moshe was saying. He was just like, I don't want to play anymore. No, I don't want to be in the book.
Not allowed to threat. Not allowed to threaten.
What sort of threat is that? I don't want to be associated with this whole thing. I want my name on this. Okay. Now, as I mentioned when I said the title of the shir before, I gave away the next point, which is that Moshe Rabbeinu's name. Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the one parsha, as we were told here, the one parsha in the entire Exodus Moshe narratives that his name doesn't appear in. The only one. There is another place, a Jewish text, where it is even more striking that Moshe's name does not appear. Anyone know what it is? There's a Jewish text where Moshe Rabbeinu's name should appear, but does not.
Isn't it a psalm?
Yes?
Haggadah.
The Haggadah. Very good. The Haggadah Shel Pesach. Imagine you are charged with the following job. I want you to write a text that the Jewish people will use to tell the story in detail of the Exodus from Egypt. The only catch is you're not allowed to mention Moshe. Could you imagine writing such a book? If it weren't for the fact that the Haggadah existed, we would consider this an impossible task. But read the Haggadah, and Moshe Rabbeinu's name is absent from the entire book, except for once. But it's brought in sort of through the back door, and it's the exception that proves the rule. Where it is that it talks about how Am Yisrael believed in God after the splitting of the sea, and it says Vayaminu ba'Hashem. It quotes the pasuk Vayaminu ba'Hashem uva Moshe avdo. So the one place where Moshe appears, he appears in the context of a pasuk that describes faith in God and refers to him as God's servant. Nothing to do with his role in the Exodus story. But basically, in the entire telling of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the entire Haggadah, Moshe Rabbeinu's name does not appear. There's no way that that's not deliberate. It is impossible that the Haggadah was written to serve the purpose that it serves, and the complete omission of Moshe Rabbeinu's name was not on purpose. Because if no one thought about it, his name would have gotten in there a whole bunch of times. Because how else are you telling the story of the Yetzias Mitzrayim? Yes, sir.
My grandmother was once complaining to me that Miriam's name doesn't appear in the Haggadah. I told her to find Moshe. That was fine.
Well done. Okay. Thank you for letting me eat some salt, too. We have to understand what that means. And lastly, as I mentioned in my introduction to the shir, another place where it's not exactly Moshe Rabbeinu, don't distract me. It's not exactly that Moshe Rabbeinu's name doesn't appear, but Moshe Rabbeinu, if we refer to him as being absent from Parshas Tetzaveh and being absent from the Haggadah, these are two places where he apparently shouldn't be absent but is. Another place where he is somewhat absent, we should say, is his burial. In the closing lines of the Chumash, the Torah tells us that we have no idea where Moshe Rabbeinu is buried. And the psukim are very, very strange. Okay, the very end of the Torah, the closing lines of the Torah, where Moshe Rabbeinu dies, it says as follows. This is a very odd pasuk. Listen to this pasuk. It's a very odd pasuk. Moshe Rabbeinu dies. It says Vayam Hashem Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu dies, and listen to what it says here. Vayikbor oto, and God buried him. Bagai, in the valley, Be'eretz Moab, in the land of Moab. Mu Beit Pa'or, opposite Beit Pa'or. It's a pretty specific location. It tells us, in the land of Moab, in the valley, opposite Beit Pa'or. And then it says, V'lo yada isha kuratu ad yom hazeh, and no one knows where he's buried. Are you taunting us? The Torah is telling us, there are not that many specific locations mentioned in the Torah. We're generally told general areas. They were in the land of Midian. They were in the Sinai Desert. Here we're told, in the valley, in the land of Moab, opposite Beit Peor. But no one has any idea where it is. Till today. Forget about it.
What's Ada Yom Hazeh?
Ada Yom Hazeh in the Torah always means forever. Like it's gone. Ada Yom Hazeh. Forget it. What's the deal? So we have three notable absences of Moshe Rabbeinu. We don't know where his grave is. It's not mentioned in the Haggadah. And he's absent from Parshas Tetzaveh. In Parshas Tetzaveh, we're sort of told a reason because of something he said at the Chet HaEgel, which is kind of like just a reason that leads to more questions. Like, what? What does it have to do with this? Why Parshas Tetzaveh? It's the Parsha before the Egel. And why did he say that? So to unpack all of this, we're going to start with the last one. The question that I just raised about this pasuk about Moshe's burial is asked directly in the Gemara Masachet Sota at the very end of the first paragraph. It says as follows: "Vayikbor oto bagai be'eretz Moab mul Beit Peor." Quotes the pasuk, in the valley, in the land of Moab, opposite Beit Peor. Amr Brachia. Brachia says, "Siman betoch siman, afilu hachi, v'lo yada isha kurato." I don't get it. It's as a location within a location, right? It's in Eretz Moab, in the guy, right? It's a very specific. In other words, a very specific location, specified by two marking points: Bagai, Mul Beit Peor, and yet no one knows where it is. B'kvar shalcha malchut harisha, etzel gistara shel Beit Peor. And the evil kingdom, meaning the Romans, the Roman leadership, when they ruled the land of Israel, apparently, famously, they once decided, they saw the text of the Bible, and they said, hey, let's go find it. So they sent a message to the local magistrate. Like they divided up lands into areas, and they had like a governor who governed and ruled a little area, a little military base in every area. So they sent a message to the guy who was who was in charge of Beit Peor. Hareinu heichan Moshe kavur. They said, okay, here's the verse. It says valley opposite Beit Peor. There's only a limited area where it could possibly be, however big that is. Figure it out. Now you know how to do a search party, like you've seen like search parties where they stand like a couple feet apart and you have a row of people. It's just a matter of how many soldiers you need, and start marching and start checking. Find it. It's got to be there. So they sent a message to the legionnaire, to the head there, and said, "Go find this." So what happened? So they went out. Amdu lamala, when they were standing up above, like on the ridge, looking down into the valley. Nidme lahem lamata. They were like, "Oh, looks like a grave right there." So they went down. Lamata, nidme lahem lamala. When they got down to the bottom, they go, "Oh, it looks like it's right up there." Wherever they were standing, it was like an Escher drawing, like, what? I thought I was going down, now I'm up. Like, they'd go down, like they'd see it, they'd walk towards it, and then whoop, it's up there. Wherever they stood, so they did the obvious thing. They divided into two groups. Okay, you start from the bottom, we'll start from the top, we'll walk towards each other. Because we can both see it. Right? We're looking like this, and they're looking like that, and they start walking towards each other. So, Otan Shomdim Lamala, the ones who were standing up above, Nimelahem Lamata, they were convinced it was down there. Lamata, the ones who were down below, Nimelahem Lamala, they were convinced it was up there. Now the story doesn't end. It just ends there and says, very strangely, L'kayem Mashenemar, this was in order to fulfill the pasuk that says, V'lo yada ishet kurato, and no man knew Moshe's burial place. Next line, Rav Chama Rav Chanina Amar, Af Moshe Rabbeinu eino yodei chan kavur. Even Moshe Rabbeinu has no idea where he's buried.
Does anybody know where they're buried?
What?
Does anybody know where they're buried?
Well, he's the only person who should know where he's buried because he actually went there alive. Okay?
He didn't write.
Okay. Now, listen up. In this Gemara, you guys familiar with the Bach? The Bach sometimes makes little editorial changes? Your average Bach is how long? 3 words? 5 words? Okay, you see this page of Gemara? You see this? That's all one note of the Bach. See that? That nice stack there? I'm going to read you this note from the Bach. The Bach includes a section of Gemara that somehow that existed in other manuscripts of Shas and was somehow taken out over this. It didn't appear in all manuscripts, and he includes it here. I will read you the Bach's insertion. The Gemara continued and said, why was Moshe buried opposite Beit Peor? In order to atone for the act of Peor. The act of Peor is that whole mess, that whole orgy they got involved in with the Benot Moab. You know what I'm talking about? With the daughters of Moab, and they came out and they had this whole thing, and then there was a plague. Pinchas, right? Pinchas, yeah, with Pinchas, the whole thing. No, it was a sexuality thing, and then they were worshiping idols, also, right? That whole thing. So Beit Peor, so that's why Moshe was buried opposite that site to atone for it. Moshe Rabbeinu is somehow atoning for sins. Okay, listen to this. This is the Bach now. This is the. It's not the Bach. It's the Gemara that had been edited out. In the text of the Gemara as it appears in the Ein Yaakov, this is all there. Says, why was Moshe Rabbeinu's grave hidden from the eyes of man? Why did God do that? Because it is revealed and known before God that the Beis Hamikdash in the future is going to be destroyed. God knew that in the future He was going to destroy the Beit Hamikdash. And He was going to exile the Jewish people from their land. So lest they come, lest the Jewish people trek out to Moshe Rabbeinu's grave, Bo'otasha, at that time. Meaning God's getting ready to destroy the Beit HaMikdash, to send the Jews into exile. So what do the Jews do? They run out to Moshe Rabbeinu's grave, v'yamdu bivchia, and they start standing there and crying, v'yitchananu l'Moshe, and they'll plead with Moshe Rabbeinu, v'yomru lo, and they'll say to him, Moshe Rabbeinu, amod b'tfilah ba'adeinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, stand up and pray for us. Now, you're not allowed to request things of a dead person, by the way, it's against the Torah, unless you're asking, the only thing you're allowed to ask a dead neshama to do, the only thing you're allowed to speak to the deceased at a grave and ask them to do, is to intercede on your behalf and daven. You're not allowed to ask them for things, because dead people can't bestow things on you, that's avodah zarah. But you can ask a deceased to intercede with God on your behalf and daven for you. Okay? You can ask them that. Okay? So, what are the Jews going to do? They're going to trek out to Moshe Rabbeinu's grave. They're going to cry out to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, Moshe, 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 help us. You helped us by the Egel, you helped us a zillion other times. Moshe Rabbeinu spends half his life davening on behalf of us because we mess up. So we're going to go, he's good at that. He's the most effective there is. So we go out to Moshe Rabbeinu's grave, we daven to Moshe Rabbeinu help us, he's going to destroy the basement, he's going to send us into Galus. And what's going to happen? V'omed Moshe, u'mevatel ta'gzera. Moshe's going to daven and God's going to do away with the decree because God gives in to Moshe. Because tzaddikim are even more beloved to Hashem in their death as they are in their life. Because you find because we see that when the Jewish people were in the desert and they made a golden calf, God got angry and said to Moshe, leave me alone, I'm going to kill them. Kama tzadikim ayuvo to ador. Kama chasidim. Moshe, Aaron, Yeshua, Eldad, Medad, Ainz Kenim, Shachachamim. And there were all these tzaddikim in that generation. And why did God end up saving the people? Lo asa b'shvilam lo bitel gzera elo b'shvil Moshe. But the only one who was able to do away with the decree then was Moshe. So you see, Moshe's got this tremendous power. So why did God conceal Moshe's grave? Because God didn't want us davening at Moshe's grave and using Moshe as a go-between, as an intermediary, and solving all our problems. He needs to be able to punish us. He needs to send us into Galus. He needs to carry out his plans. He needs to have that. That justice has to be done. Moshe Rabbeinu is such a tower of righteousness and of merit that if he's alive, we'll daven to him. So God concealed him. Yes,
but God doesn't have to say yes to Moshe. So why is he saying that? He's basically saying that he has to say yes. So why, in a normal case, Moshe should be able to be rejected by God because he is a human being.
I like the way you think. It's not what I was going to say next, but it's a very good point you raised. Does God have to answer him? So first of all, there is a principle as part of God's system that Ritzon Yireh Av Yaseh. God does the will of those who fear him. But even so, you could say, well, he doesn't have to listen to him. God could say to Moshe, look, not this time. But there's another issue here also. Let's use your question to think a little bit more sophisticated. The Gemara is telling us here that the problem is that we would have this out. Meaning, it would affect us. We have a wild card in our back pocket. We have a get-out-of-jail-free card. That makes us behave a little differently. Because we know that no matter how bad we get, we can always play our ace. Okay? God doesn't want us to have that ace. What effect is that going to have on us? We're going to be more careful. Right? And we're going to turn in tefillah directly to him. There's a number of effects it's going to have. We're going to be more careful. We're going to turn in tefillah directly to him. We'll also be able to get punished. Getting punished is not, I mean, it hurts, but it's not a bad thing. Because that's the way you get to fix yourself. You don't get punished. We don't go into gullus. We're never going to fix our problems. There's a lot of good stuff that has to happen in terms of our relationship with Hashem and our standing on our own 2 feet and our maturing as a people. And all these things have to happen. We got to get Moshe Rabbeinu out of the way. There's another deeper question, though, which is, how about all the other tzaddikim whose graves we know where they are? Can we go to Avram Avinu's grave and daven and have him daven on our behalf? And go to Yitzchak Avinu, right? And you know, everybody. We know where all they are. We know where Yonas Avinu Ziel's grave, right? Right? There's so many graves we can go to. We know where they are. We know where the graves of the Avos are. Marsa Machpelah is, of course, an important place. Hashem didn't conceal it from us. On the contrary, we see that Pinchas Davka went there to daven, and when they went in, I'm sorry, Khalid Davka went there to daven when he went in as one of the spies. So why Davka Moshe Rabbeinu? So I'd like to suggest the following: Moshe Rabbeinu. But you know what? Let's answer another question first. Why is he not in the Haggadah? Why is he not in the Haggadah?
It seems like that it's through him that we're getting taken down, not a.
So I would like to share something with you. When Am Yisrael get out of Egypt, right after they get out, like literally like the first few psukim after they get out, right after the Az Yashir, the splitting of the sea, they're out there. When the problems begin, and they first complain to Moshe. Okay? They said to Bnei Israel, we're going to die in the desert. It's better that we had died in Egypt. Ki hotzeitem otanu el hamidbar. You, plural, have taken us out of Egypt to this desert. You, Moshe and Aaron. And then Moshe Rabbeinu responds to them and says he's going to give you man. V'yidatem ki Hashem hotzi etchem eretz Mitzrayim. So that you'll know that God took you out. And then later on, this happens again. They again complain, and again they say, you took us out. And again Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, God took you out. And then what happens when they... hold on a second. Right, here we go. After the man, then they run out of water. They don't have any water. Okay? There was no water, lishtot. And they say, Lama hel litanu mimitzrayim. They said to Moshe, the people complained to Moshe, and they said, why did you take us out of Egypt? Okay? So Hashem gets upset. Why? Because you're saying that God is not with us. And then by the Egel, what happens? They see that it says, Vayara am ki voshesh Moshe l'redi min har. The nation saw that Moshe was delaying in coming down from the mountain. So what they do? They made a calf. And what they say about the calf? Ela Elohecha Yisrael Asher. What's it from Eretz Yisrael? This is your God that took you out of Egypt. Were they trying to replace God or Moshe? Contextually, they were trying to replace Moshe. They said, they saw that Moshe wasn't coming down, so they said, we need to have a God. They go to Aaron and they say, we see the man Moshe is not coming, so we need a God to replace him. So make us a God. They make a God and they say, this is the one that took you out of Egypt. This is the replacement for Moshe. The Am Yisrael had a serious problem digesting the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was not the one who did this. That he was not the one who took them out of Egypt. Now, it's an understandable problem. Because if you're watching everything, he's the one doing everything. Moshe Rabbeinu, the problem with Moshe Rabbeinu that no other great Navi, not Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, no one else has, is that he actually was an intermediary. Literally. God would tell him things, he'd tell them to us. We'd say things to Moshe, he'd tell them to God. He actually served as an intermediary. So it's a problem. We have a religion, we're not supposed to have any intermediaries, and here's a person whose actual role was to be an intermediary. He was constantly telling us what God was saying, and we would relay our concerns to God through him, and he would plead on our behalf before God, and he would then come to us and tell us God's message. He functioned as an intermediary. So to now go around and tell us that you're not supposed to have any intermediaries, they couldn't get their heads around it. They understood. They saw Moshe as this halfway God. He was part man, part God. He wasn't exactly a human. So when they saw he wasn't coming back, they didn't say, hey, let's appoint a new leader, because they didn't view Moshe as a man. They said, we need a God to replace Moshe, the one who took us out of Egypt, who served as that intermediary between God and man. We need another one of those. And there's no person who could do that. So let's create this thing that'll do it. That's what idols do. They house godliness. They viewed Moshe as a kind of idol, as a kind of intermediary. Again, a very easy mistake to make. Look at what he's doing. He's doing all these miracles, he's making the sea split, he's doing all these things, he's giving us the Torah. On Har Sinai, there's God, and there's us, and there's him in the middle, and he's relaying everything back and forth. He's an intermediary. Notice we just tied together the Exodus and the golden calf. Now let's get back to our original question. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu say, wipe me out of the book? So Moshe Rabbeinu says to God, God says, Moshe, I'm wiping them out. They just don't get it. They don't understand what's going on. This religion is doomed from the get-go. They're just a bunch of idolaters. I'm starting over from you. Moshe Rabbeinu says, God, I got another solution. I understand the problem. There's another way around it. Take my name out of the book. If I'm not part of the story, no problem. If the whole problem that led to this golden calf was their misunderstanding of my role and the role of, and that they misunderstood the fact that you can't have any, they didn't get that you can't have an intermediary in this religion. So perfect. Wipe me out of the book, and then you don't have a problem anymore. Let's retell the whole thing without me, and then we're cool. You won't have a problem anymore. Figure out a way to tell it that it's God who does everything. No intermediary. No Moshe problem. It's all about God. Beautiful. Wipe me out of the book, God. That's my solution. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu says to him. That's why he's not in the Agada. Because on the night that we're going to tell about Yetzias Mitzrayim, we are supposed to focus on God. Because we don't want to make the same mistake again. The first time the Exodus happened, there was a big problem. A major fly in the ointment. It messed everything up. They were focused on Moshe. So when we retell the story, we leave him out of the story. And we work really hard to do so. Like I said, if you were told to write that story without mentioning Moshe, I mean, think about it. When Hollywood goes ahead and makes the Exodus story, they name the stupid movie Moses. Moses, Prince of Egypt. They name the whole thing Moses. Because they can't tell a story without a charismatic character in the middle. Moshe Rabbeinu probably wasn't charismatic. He was an old guy with a speech impediment. Old guy who lisped and stuttered. You know, like...
That should have been the name of the movie.
You see, but Hollywood can't handle that. Every hero has to be good-looking, because only good-looking people can be heroes. It has to be that way. So you have to be, you know, you have to be good-looking to be in shape. You have to have, like, you know, a six-pack. You have to be a hero. You know, like, you can't be an old... Moshe Rabbeinu, by all accounts, was an old guy with a speech impediment. That's what he was. Okay? He was not a very charismatic person. Who didn't really like being a leader and was a very modest person. Not exactly, someone who's running for president. Anyway, Moshe Rabbeinu says to God, let's solve the problem by omitting me from the story. That's what we do with the Haggadah. That's why we don't know where his grave is. Because this Moshe problem would persist. It would persist throughout Jewish history. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is different than every other prophet. He was an intermediary. And that's why that's what it means in that Medrash, where it says, why do we not know where he's buried? The Maharal Prague has a great comment on this Gemara in Sota. He says, why Dafka Moshe Rabbeinu? He says, what's a grave? A grave is a place in this world for the physical vessel that housed this person. Every person has two identities. You have a soul and you have a body, and they mesh together to make your life. We very much identify with our bodies, right? This is me. This is me. That's how we all feel, right? I don't feel entirely like a soul. I don't feel entirely like a body. I feel kind of like, right? I'm a mix. We very much identify with our bodies, which is part of why, if you read Arya Kaplan and stuff on death, part of why death is so painful, because when we separate from our bodies, that's me. But that's not me, because I'm the soul, and it's a very jarring experience. Existentially, it's very difficult. Moshe Rabbeinu did not relate so much to his body. Moshe Rabbeinu went 40 days and 40 nights without eating and drinking. He was so spiritual. He was in constant state. For years, he separated from his wife, something that no other prophet was ever supposed to do and no one's supposed to do. But he was supposed to do because he was not entirely physical. He was not living a normal physical life. He was in a constant state of the highest form of nevuah ever, for years. Constant state. He was, like, he could say, okay, someone could ask him a question, he'd go, hold on a second. Oh, okay, I just got a prophecy. And when you read about prophecy, you guys have learned about prophecy in the philosophy class, it's like a trance state. It's not for Moshe Rabbeinu. He was in a constant waking state of prophecy. He was not of this world. His face shone. Moshe Rabbeinu was different. So, was his body really him? The way everyone else's body is them? No. So says the Maharal, his burial place is a meaningless place, because his body wasn't part of his identity the way everyone else's body is. It was like the car he was driving. It was just this thing that he was in. It wasn't him in any way. It was different. So what's a burial place? Oh, that's where his body is. His body, he didn't even identify with his body. Now, what's the end of that chazal? To those who were above, he looked like he was down there. To those who were down there, he looked above. What does that mean? Now think about that. If you try to look at him as a human, no, he's not quite human. He's more like an angel. But then if you try to look at him like an angel, you'd be like, no, he's a human. He didn't fit any category. To those who were above, he looked like he was below. If you looked at him looking at him like an angel, then he looked more human. If you looked at him like looking at a human, no, it doesn't fit that category either. That's what and then it says, that's what the Gemara says, L'kayim, this fulfilled the pasuk, V'lo yada ishet kvurato. Now, V'lo yada ishet kvurato. How do you say grave in Hebrew? Kever. What does the word kvura mean? Burial. The kvura is the act of burial. When we say that we're going to someone's grave, we don't say we're going to his kvura. Like, the monument on Rachel's grave is called Matzevet Kvurat Rachel. It's the monument to the burial of Rachel. But a kvura is a burial, not necessarily a gravesite. I'll tell you something interesting. Targum Yonatan ben Uziel. You know that Targum, there's two Targums on the page in Mikra Kedolah. One is Onkelos, who is almost always a straight translation of Aramaic. And then there's Yonatan ben Uziel, who throws in Midrashim. Well, Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, let's start with Onkelos. Onkelos translates V'lo yada ishet kvurato as V'lo yada bar nash yad kurte. Very nice. And no one knows his burial, just like the pasuk says. Targum Yonatan translates it like this: V'lo yada ishet kvurato V'lo chakim bar nash yad kurte. What does chakim mean? From the word chachma. That doesn't mean no one knows where it is. It means no one understands it. No one understands the concept of Moshe's burial. Moshe was not a purely, he was an unusual, he was a once in a history being. He didn't live a normal life, and therefore his grave is not like other graves. And no one quite understands what the burial of Moshe is. It's not like everyone else's burial. Okay. So why Tetzaveh? Why Tetzaveh? So I'll tell you a little secret. Moshe Rabbeinu's name, it's true, does not appear in Tetzaveh. How many times do you think Moshe Rabbeinu's name appears in Truma, last week's parsha? Once. Thank you. In the opening pasuk, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. From the words Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor in the first pasuk of Truma until the end of Tetzaveh, Moshe Rabbeinu's name does not appear. The truth is, Moshe Rabbeinu's name essentially does not appear in the entire Truma and Tetzaveh. 2 straight parshas. What are Truma and Tetzaveh about? About the building of the Mishkan. They're all about the building of the Mishkan. What's the Mishkan all about? What? It's all about serving God. It's all about our interface with God. What's the centerpiece of the whole Mishkan that it's all built around? The Aron. What's in the Aron? The Torah. This is all about, and the Luchot, which are our point of contact with God. The Mishkan is entirely about our interface with God. Our big Achilles heel, our big weakness in our interface with God, the thought, and sometimes the urge. People have the urge for intermediaries, whether they're Rebbes or whether they're other things. People love intermediaries. Now, Rebbes are great. You have to be careful. People love intermediaries. They feel comfortable with intermediaries. That's why other religions are so popular. Our big flaw, our big problem with Moshe, the Moshe problem of looking for people to serve as our intermediary, he's omitted from the parsha that's all about the building of the Mishkan. More specifically, he's omitted from Tetzaveh. What makes Tetzaveh and Truma different? Anyone know? What's Truma? Is it just like one long thing and they decided to chop it in half because it was too long? Is that how we got 2 parshas? What makes Truma and Tetzaveh different? Anyone know? Good. Basically, Truma is about the building of the structure of the building. Okay? Tetzaveh is about the lighting of the menorah. It's about the sanctification of the Kohanim, about the building of, about the Korban Tamid. It's about the content. And I'll tell you something cool. In Parshas Truma, besides Moshe's name not appearing, other than Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, God's name doesn't appear in Truma. In Parshas Truma, other than Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, God's name doesn't appear the rest of the parsha. In Parshas Tetzaveh, God's name appears left and right. In this week's parsha, God's name appears all over the place. Lifnei Hashem, Lifnei Hashem, Lifnei Hashem, Lifnei Hashem. God's name appears constantly. 20 times in this parsha. 22 times, I think. I once counted. Something like that. Low 20s. And in Truma, zilch. What's that all about? What God's telling us is the holiness of the Mishkan is not the building. It's what goes on in the building. So in the parsha that emphasizes God and our service of God, the Korban Tamid, and the Mizbeach HaKtores, and the Menorah, and the Kohanim. And the Kohanim is a big one. They seem a lot like intermediaries. In that parsha, Moshe, our big intermediary, does not get mentioned. He sends us a message. And that's why the appropriate response to the Egel is the omission of Moshe's name, is that same message. What led to the Egel was viewing Moshe as an intermediary. So in the parshas that talk about the Mishkan, and specifically about the service in the Mishkan, which is our main interface with God, God says, you know what, Moshe? I'm going to take your suggestion. You're right. If I take you out of the picture, this problem won't happen again. But I don't have to take you out of the whole book. I just have to take you out of the service of God. If I remove you from that, if we make it a principle of this religion that there's no intermediaries with God, in the context of service of Hashem, that'll do the trick. So Moshe, I like your suggestion. You're right. So Moshe's name gets omitted from Parshas Tetzaveh. His name gets omitted from the Haggadah. The same Egel problem, the same Yetzias Mitzrayim problem. And we don't know where his grave is. It's all part of the same problem. No intermediaries in our religion. Zell. Good night.
I don't remember this one.
Careful.